Hello class. For this video lecture, I'm going to talk a little bit about the use of theory in a research project. So when you're conducting really any research project, it's important that you frame or ground your research or look at it through the lens of some theoretical perspective. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit and talk about what that means, what that looks like. And again, as you go from undergraduate to graduate to maybe a doctoral level program, those theoretical perspectives become far more important because really that's what's being used to really again center or focus your research at this level. Maybe it's not as critical as that doctoral level, but still very important. So we need to start again with the differences between quantitative and qualitative or mixed research methods, and then kind of work outward from there. So earlier in this class, we talked about philosophic assumptions and how do you think knowledge is created, and that's an important discussion to have first because we'll approach research projects differently if we have that post-positivist type of approach, or that quantitative approach, that numbers approach, versus a more qualitative approach or a constructivist and understanding the subjects, and even at times inserting myself as a researcher into the research, into the project, to better understand what's going on. So based on the research question that you're trying to answer will best determine what methods you should be using, and in turn that will be directing you towards the theories, the type of theories you might use, or the approach to the research itself. So again, let's unpack that a little bit because that might sound a little jumbled and confusing. So depending on your approach to your research, you're going to look at theory a little differently. You're going to approach theory a little differently, and the way you then insert it into your research project. If I'm doing a quantitative project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to really be testing hypotheses from the theory. So if you really, if you get into some of the theories, and some of the theories unfortunately are covered a little more superficially than others, but if you really dive deep down into the theories, there's a set of axioms or hypotheses that the researcher says, okay, this is what I would expect to see based on my observations. Let's go out and let's test those across different populations and different sets of circumstances, using a survey and then statistics to measure that. So really, when I'm conducting a quantitative research project, I'm just really testing one of those hypotheses. Let me see if I can give you some examples of that, because the quantitative approach is something I'm much more familiar with than qualitative. But so for a quantitative research project, I've done a few mentorship projects in my past, and probably one of the most in-depth ones that I did was the impact of employee ownership in a company on their motivation. It was an ESOP, an employee-owned organization where all employees share some type of ownership. So what's the impact to employee motivation on this? And the theoretical perspective they looked at was Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory, especially the introjected or identified and integrated parts of external motivation. So based on the writings of Deci and Ryan, they said this is what they wrote about those two types of external motivations, and this is what I'm observing. So I would expect to see that within employee ownership, because I think that's what's motivating them, that integrated form of external motivation. And according to Deci and Ryan, you should see this. We found a survey that measured that, and we went to the employees. A bunch of employees took it, and it turned out that the observation was correct. That did reinforce that theory. So we were looking at motivating employees through ownership through that particular lens. We didn't talk about Maslow, we didn't talk about Hertzberg, we didn't talk about McClellan, any of those. We just said we're going to look at it through this Deci and Ryan self-determination theory, specifically this. And that was the way that project was conducted. This term, I have a student who's looking at providing feedback to employees, customer service employees, to see if that improves customer satisfaction surveys. So employees are observed with their interactions with customers, and then they're provided feedback as to their interaction. And through that, you would expect to see some type of improvement, right? So you'll have employees who are getting feedback, employees who aren't getting feedback. So you have a treatment group, who's the employees who are getting the feedback, and a control group, and those are the employees who aren't getting the feedback. So you would hope that you see some improvement in customer satisfaction surveys with that treatment group. So you have independent variables and a dependent variable in those situations. You could look through that through a lot of theoretical perspectives too. You could look at it maybe through learning theory. Are they learning more as we're giving them feedback? You could look at it through something like social cognitive theory and self-efficacy, where one of the ways we learn things, one of the ways we become confident in doing things is getting feedback. So you could say, well, I'm going to look at this through the theoretical perspective of Bandura's social cognitive theory. And since feedback is a mechanism through which people learn, I'm going to kind of frame my research in that perspective. There are also customer satisfaction theories that can be used if that's the approach you want to take. And then again, you will go ahead, there'll be a survey that you'll find, you'll administer it, and then you're just trying to align with the hypotheses from that theory. So that's the way you would approach it with a quantitative research project. The flip side of that is a qualitative research project. And as it says there, you may use it as a lens in order maybe to generate a theory. So a lot of times when you're doing qualitative research, and please keep this in mind as you go on and do some research projects, especially the capstone, that sometimes there's not a theory that's developed. You might be observing something that's relatively new, and you need to understand what's going on. Right now, as I'm filming this video, we have a pandemic with coronavirus, and there's a lot of new things that are happening that we're learning through this virus that we don't have years and years and years and years of knowledge build up already. So you may be looking at customer choices during a pandemic. You may be looking at different types of communications during a pandemic. You may be looking at work efficiencies during a pandemic or participation. All those things are relatively new to us. So there's really no strong theory that says, here's the way people behave during a pandemic. Go ahead and look at those hypotheses and try to tell us whether, yes, we're on the right track or not. In a qualitative research project, you're trying to understand a phenomenon. You're examining it for the first time and saying, oh, here's what I am observing. And you usually do that through either questions, open-ended type questions, where you try to dig down and find something. You try to find people answering it similar, maybe not exactly the same way, but they're answering the questions in a similar fashion. And you could say, oh, okay, there's a theme here. I see that something is very similar here, and I think the theme is this. And then from there, you could say, oh, okay, that's similar to this theory that already exists. So see, it's kind of a reverse. It's deductive versus inductive reasoning. Oh, okay, I see that this is going on. I'm going to write about it in that context. So it's really after the fact that you're looking and saying, oh, it's that theory. Now I see what's going on. Or the flip side of that is maybe you're developing there's a whole new theory that you're developing, and maybe your research is just part of a larger theory that may eventually come into being. So, and then mixed methods is really a triangulation, I would say, of of the two types of methods where you're almost reinforcing what it is that you're finding out through open-ended type questions. So you conduct a survey, you say, oh yeah, okay, employees are motivated by ownership through this integrated form of motivation that Desi and Ryan talked about. In addition to the survey that I administered that statistically demonstrate this, I also asked a bunch of questions. And the theme that emerged was they find value in it, and they assimilate it and make it their own, and they're motivated that way. So that reinforces what the survey says. So I've kind of triangulated my data, and it all points to the same thing. That would be how you conduct a mixed method research. So again, within the chapter, it breaks down a little more about quantitative versus qualitative research. What are some of the things within quantitative research where you'll see extraneous variables, you'll find moderators and mediators, antecedents you'll see, and then we talked about dependent and independent variables. Those are the things you'll see in quantitative research. And then qualitative is going to really be more about how am I going to go about finding these answers to questions that I really don't know too much about. Am I going to ask people? Am I going to immerse myself in the condition that they're in order to better understand it? Is it going to be a case study where, look, this is just one small business in the vast array of all these businesses, but I'm just going to go here and look at something with these few people and see what happens, and then we'll see if we can kind of broaden that and generalize that over the years to see if that holds true for other businesses. So really quick to summarize, your philosophic assumptions are going to guide your research along with what it is you're trying to find out, right? So if you say, oh, this interests me at work, I want to find out more about this. This sounds like it aligns best with a quantitative research project. And oh, good, because I have this kind of post-positivist direction anyway. So that those two things align. That's what I'm going to do. So understand what it is you're trying to find out. Understand, is it something that's really new and we don't know too much about it, or is it something that was kind of been around for a while, like motivation, and I just need to kind of put it into a particular motivational perspective. And then again, become familiar with that theory. You're not going to have to read 7 textbooks about it, but become familiar enough with it where there's maybe some elements in there or some hypotheses or something where you could dig a little deeper and say, yeah, okay, this is going to now be part of my literature review and part of the theoretical perspective through which I'm going to view or place everything that I do.